the author of The Gaslighting of the Millennial Generation, How to Succeed in a Society That Blames You for Everything Gone Wrong. I'm a local author. I live on the west side of Cleveland in West Park, and I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in higher education, with a background in career counseling and marketing. We'll talk about millennial job hopping later. It's relevant. And I also write and teach about boundaries and emotional recovery after leaving an abusive marriage 2 years ago. So a long and varied story like many millennials. I'm going to start off just by talking about how I got the idea for the gaslighting of the millennial generation. It actually started as a blog post I wrote in 2016. I had been doing some research into emotional abuse and recovery and trauma work, and kept coming across the concept of gaslighting, which is a manipulation tactic where essentially you make people doubt their own perceptions or reality. So they tell you their experience of something and you essentially say, what, that's crazy, that can't be right. And the more I was learning about this concept, the more I realized that that's sort of how we've been treating young people as they're entering the workforce. So we were raised being told, if you work hard, you can do anything. And then, we leave college, or maybe we don't go to college, and we're putting in the work, we're working really hard, but we're not really getting anywhere. And so the more noise we make about that, the more we're told that's not really how it works, you're being kind of entitled. So this book came from that. So after the blog post, I turned it into a full-length book. It's got 12 chapters, and each chapter is titled Millennials Are Killing Something or Other. So topics range from the American dream to relationships and marriage to the economy, just anything that we can be accused of destroying as dirty, entitled millennials. I tried to hit the highlights of. Excuse me while I check my notes. So what I wanted to do with the book was not only address this concept of gaslighting, I wanted to validate what millennials were going through. I wanted to have space for those experiences, let people know that they're relatable, they're not unique, they're not doing it wrong and messing up, and they're not alone. So there's a mix of that sort of reassurance, unpacking why we're being accused of being so entitled when we want sort of basic human necessities. And then each chapter ends with some practical advice to make sure you're killing it, since we're killing everything. I also want to really quickly acknowledge privilege. So I'm a well-educated white person. I am queer, but I can pass for cis and straight, and that affords me a lot of privilege in society. Society's set up for people who look like me. So as much as possible throughout the book, when I talk about concepts, I know that not everyone views their experiences as a millennial or as anyone in our society through the same lens that I did. So I try as much as possible to talk about how racism, classism, and ableism might affect people's experiences throughout the book, because I don't just want to be blabbing on about my experiences. I want it to be as relatable as possible for everyone who reads it. I am a millennial with baby boomer parents, so those are the experiences that I talk about a lot. I've gotten a little bit of commentary like, you skipped Gen X in the middle, but Gen X is kind of used to it, unfortunately. And also, that's just not my lived experience, so I can't really speak to Gen X because I'm a millennial with boomer parents, so that's what I'm writing about. And overall, what I want people to take away from this book is that, one, they're not alone in their struggles. Two, that I want millennials to keep standing up and speaking out when they see that things aren't right and aren't fair. I love that about us. I love that we're pointing to problems in society and saying, hey, let's maybe do something about that. generational blame game to stop with us. I want us to pave the way for Generation Z to come through and be as amazing as they're already showing us they are. And so I don't want us to argue about the kids these days on TikTok with their Tide Pods and everything, because that's just more infighting and it's not helping us get where we want to go. And also, this is not a book that's just for millennials. So obviously I've been talking about Gen Z a lot. I feel like it could be a really helpful primer for Gen Z, especially as they're finishing high school, entering college. And I've also had Gen X and baby boomer readers say that they really loved it and appreciated the perspective it gave them about the millennial experience. So just to get into the content of the book, I wrote it in such a way that you can read one chapter if that's a certain topic that you're interested in, or you can read through the whole book. And it's definitely one that you can take chapter by chapter. It doesn't have sort of an overall narrative, it's definitely each unique section. So it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is called Millennials Are Entitled Disrespectful Punks. And that section talks about the American dream, difficult parent-child relationships once millennials entered adulthood, and we're starting to connect with our parents on that level, and the tension that can arise there, especially if we had difficult childhoods. There's a chapter about the workforce and the career path of millennials. Like I mentioned, tends to be a little bit more job hopping and mix and match career building there. And then there's a chapter about the education system. So I started the book off here because these are some of the, I think, biggest, most impactful claims that people make about millennials and about how we are upending the status quo, which I personally think is a good thing. The American Dream chapter really tackles that avocado toast headline where it says, if millennials want to buy a house, they need to lay off the avocado toast. So this tackles that assumption that we can't be homeowners because we're too busy spending frivolously on brunch. And I really address the structure of the American dream, air quotes, and the fact that it's really built on that idea that if you work hard, you'll achieve it. So the American dream being, a stable career, retirement savings, a nice house, marriage and kids, if you want that. But what's sort of sinister about the American dream is that by telling everybody that if you work hard, you can achieve it, anybody who hasn't achieved it, there's this easy finger pointing we can do to say, well, they're obviously not working hard enough. And then millennials are coming in to ruin the day once again, and they say, how can we buy a home? It's not the avocado toast, it's student loans, it's the fact that the minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009, it's the fact that we can't afford rent and retirement and health care. So we've started to see the American dream sort of fall apart around the edges. And we really need to acknowledge that original American dream is only accessible to a privileged few. People who can afford to go to college without too much debt or no debt. People who don't need to work 2 or 3 jobs to make a living. There's definitely a lot of privilege involved in the American dream, and I think that millennials on the whole are realizing that and pointing it out, and so that gaslighting effect comes in when they say, hey, this seems kind of messed up, maybe we should change the way we're doing things, and the establishment says, hey, we don't talk about that. Just keep working hard, you'll get there, I promise. And we're starting to see that that's not necessarily the truth. So related to the American dream is like the career trajectory of millennials. So I want to do a little bit about that workplace chapter. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a bachelor's in psychology, and then I went to grad school to work in higher education. I ended up doing purchasing, and while I was doing freelance marketing also, and now I do full-time marketing. So none of what I studied in college is necessarily relevant to what I do as a career now. And you find that a lot, I think, with millennials. So your classic career path for, say, a baby boomer is, you get an entry-level job, you put in time, you get a promotion, you put in time, you get a promotion, you put in the time, then you retire comfortably at 65. Obviously not everybody, and obviously there are barriers and struggles across generations, but that's your typical ladder. They call it the corporate ladder for a reason. And millennials are coming in and they are leaving jobs without putting in all that time because they want a better work-life balance. They want a better culture fit. And this is really forcing companies when they're hiring new talent, because millennials now are basically adults under 40. So people are hiring millennials. And millennials want flexible hours. They want flex time so that they can go to a doctor's appointment. We really like remote work, which is now especially relevant in the COVID pandemic because we found out pretty quickly that most office work can be done from home without losing any productivity. So I think what we're going to see post-COVID, hopefully there's a post-COVID, is that there will be a lot more companies offering remote work as a flexible perk when they're hiring people. And that's going to attract the millennials because we like that flexibility. We like the work-life balance. When you don't have to get up super early to get ready and commute and then commute home before you make dinner, like you get a lot of hours in your day back that you can spend on things that make you happy, such as sleeping or having a hobby. And we also want better paid parental leave when we have kids, better vacation time, wages that are more in line with the cost of living, and even union protections. And then once again, we say, hey, how about these things? They do them in other countries, they're working. People seem really happy over there in those other countries. And we're again told no, we don't talk about that. Don't question it, just keep working, you'll get there. And so again, it's this cultural gaslighting. Just some stats out of the book. A 2014 study at Bentley University reported that millennials would take a pay cut on average of $7,600 a year. So that's almost $8,000 to take a job with a better work-life balance, better company culture, or that they felt was more purposeful. So we don't like work that just feels like droning along for somebody else's dollar. We like work that makes us feel good about ourselves and the work that we do, as well as what the company as a whole is doing. So we want to do work that we feel matters. And I think we're going to see this also with Gen Z as they enter the workforce. So I think that companies are going to have to adapt as we continue, because if you can't lure in the talent with money when you have a bad company culture, you're going to have to adapt your company culture, which I think is a good thing. I've also noticed I do resume writing and cover letter writing, and I help people find jobs as sort of one of my side businesses, because millennials have to have 4 businesses, I guess. That job descriptions that are being posted by companies now have a really big focus on what it's like to work there and what the culture is like. So we're seeing a lot of, one Friday a month we do a team outing. They're really trying to showcase the ways that they value their workers. And so that's going to attract the millennials that want that sort of more fun, more purposeful, team-oriented work, which I think is exciting. And then, on your way to those jobs, we need to talk about education. And the education chapter not only talks about college, but it starts in preschool. So your school experience can add a lot to your struggle, or can add a lot to your privilege, which I think, once again, is important to recognize. So a big question that comes up is, do you need to go to college to be successful? What does success mean? Does it mean having a degree? Does it mean having a certain income? Does it mean being debt-free? Does it mean that American dream? Only you can decide what success means for you, which is good, and also sometimes a struggle, because you look into the void and you don't know what your means of success is, so there's a little existential crisis sometimes. But I think that college is not always necessary. I think we put a lot of pressure on very young people to decide what they're gonna do with the rest of their lives. And at 18, if somebody's not sure they wanna go to college, I think it's irresponsible to force them into debt, because college is just part of the process. I think it's completely valid if you wanna take a couple years off to decide what you wanna do, or if you wanna go to trade school instead, or if you wanna go to school part-time, or you end up in your 40s and decide, I'm ready to get a degree now. So however you wanna do it, whether or not you wanna go to college, I think it's really important that we don't put so much pressure on the way you're supposed to do it, which I think is pretty important. And you'll even have people making their own businesses, whether or not they went to college. You know, there's all sorts of lists of, you know, careers you can get without a college degree, and that's super valid. So that's what I explore in that education chapter. Next up, in part 2, millennials are destroying society. There's a few chapters, but what I really want to talk about is the chapter about the economy, because there's headlines like, why aren't millennials buying diamonds, and millennials aren't saving for retirement, and millennials have killed the mall. And I, once again, think it's a little unfair to blame all of that on the millennials. We don't need malls because all those stores are online. And we don't buy diamonds because we have found out that diamonds can be very unethical, and also we have to pay rent and healthcare, so we don't have a lot of diamond money laying around. So just to get back to, like, we can't afford those luxury items, goes back to the minimum wage issue, goes back to housing costs, goes back to wealth in general. The latest numbers from the Federal Reserve say that baby boomers have 56.8% of the wealth in the United States, and millennials have 3.4%. So we're not buying diamonds, or insert what industry we've helplessly murdered, because we don't have the funds to be doing that. We're basically just trying to survive, especially during COVID right now. And then this chapter also tackles poverty and the poverty line. Millennials are the most impoverished generation as of 2016 data from the Pew Research Center. I could not find more updated data, I tried, but that was the last big report that came out. So in 2016, we had 5.3 million millennial households under the poverty line in the United States. And obviously this affects other generations as well, so 5 million baby boomer households and 4.2 million Gen X households are all under the poverty line. And that's important to talk about in relation to that American dream, in relation to the economy and the workforce and everything like that, because while we do have security measures in place to help people who are under the poverty line, like food stamps, housing assistance, daycare assistance, things like that, so that people can go to work, they can work hard for that American dream, you can get a 25-cent pay raise that loses you eligibility for all your benefits, and then you're worse off than you were before you got a raise. So our systems are set up to keep poor people poor, and the more we point that out, the more everybody says, hey, we don't talk about that, be quiet, you're starting to sound a little crazy and entitled. Gaslighting. So definitely, my intention here is to just let people know again that they're not crazy for saying, but this is my experience and I'm working hard and it's not getting me anywhere. You know, the expectation is that that should make you successful, and then you're not successful by American dream standards, and you think you're doing something wrong, and other people think you're doing something wrong. So we're creating this us versus them thing of, well, people who don't have these measures of success must not be working hard enough, and those things will never happen to me because I work hard. But 40% of Americans are one missed paycheck away from the poverty line. We wouldn't know what to do. We're paycheck to paycheck in this country, and we're so much closer to being homeless or jobless than we are to becoming billionaires. But if the billionaires keep us arguing amongst ourselves, then we don't notice the billionaires telling us not to worry and that everything will be all right. So I am apparently slowly radicalizing people with this, or just pointing out that, you know, there's issues in society, and it's okay to talk about them, and we should talk about them, and we should make change. So that's my hard hitter from part 2, and then in part 3, millennials are just making stuff up now. I talk about gender identity, the Me Too movement, the relationship escalator, how we're killing marriage by not necessarily going, you know, dating, marriage, babies. We're turning all that on its head. Millennial parenting, which I had to consult with millennial parents about to make sure I knew what I was talking about. And then just sort of a call to action, once again, to stop turning it around and blaming it on the next generation when they show up and they start making this noise too. I want millennials to, you know, cheer on Gen Z, which so far we've really been doing a good job of. Transitioning now out of the book into the world of 2020, because there's so much going on since I wrote this that I really want to talk about. That's especially the fact that millennials and Generation Z are so active politically and in activism and advocacy work. We're seeing a demand for more transparency from brands and businesses. We're seeing that millennial and Gen Z consumers expect brands to stand up for social justice issues, and we expect to see more about their business practices. And if they, you know, Nike did an ad for Black Lives Matter that basically said, I think it was just this once, don't do it, as in like don't turn your back on racism, don't look away. And the millennials and Gen Z were like, cool, well, we buy Nike now. And that got them a lot of good brand affinity. So it's a good business move now for brands to be chasing that millennial and Gen Z approval, because those are the fastest growing generations with buying power. And we also are voting with our dollar, shopping locally in small businesses, trying to keep local businesses afloat, especially during COVID. I know a lot of my friends were not eating out as much because we're tipping higher when we do eat out. So that restaurant budget, you know, we're trying to keep the restaurants that are locally owned and supported afloat more, because we don't know what it's going to look like by the time whatever is happening with COVID is done happening. We're also seeing millennials and Gen Z and the older generations purchase from Black-owned companies and crafters and queer-owned companies and crafters. So we're saying, you know, I want to support these communities that are typically marginalized and held back from business. So we're definitely, what money we do have, we're spending it in ways that align with our morals, which I love about us and about Gen Z. I specifically want to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, just because that is so important to discuss in 2020. We've seen protests happening 77% of them have been to a protest, and 62% are willing to be arrested at a protest. So Generation Z is not holding back. They're showing up, and I love them for it, and I'm so excited about it, and I can't wait to hear more about what they're doing. But that really starts with us as the millennial generation. You know, we've been recognizing and pointing out, you know, this isn't right. We need to change the way our society is set up. And everybody older than us is saying, no, you need to just pipe down, just keep your head down and work hard and you'll get there. We need to keep saying that we need change, and then we need to give Gen Z the space to show up and have 90% of them supporting really important